Hi, I'm Vera Bergengruen. I'm the Washington Correspondent for Time. And joining us today is Harry Williams, the CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, a nonprofit that represents more than 300,000 students at 47 historically Black colleges across the country. Welcome to Time 100 Talks.
Good morning. It's good to be here with you this morning. Thank you.
Well, so obviously for all of us, the upcoming school year is looking extremely different than we could have expected 6 months or a year ago. And so what are some of the biggest challenges for the Thurgood Marshall College Fund and the students that it supports as you navigate this whole new normal, and how are you trying to change your plans and programs to address this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you're right. This is the time of the year when students are planning to go back to school. But unfortunately, with COVID-19 and what's happening real time, it's been making it very, very difficult. As you all recall, in March, when most of the schools, all the schools actually in the country, had to pivot and exit out in a very, very quick way. The students that we serve come from challenging communities. And so therefore, it was very, very difficult for some of our students. As you referenced in your earlier remarks about TMCF, we have more than 300,000 students attending our institution, but majority of our students who attend come from families that have financial challenges for them to go to school. So therefore, when they had to pivot very quickly, they didn't have any extra money to buy airline tickets, to find transportation home, or to pay for rent. So therefore, we at TMCF, we immediately went into action to provide support to those young people. A large percentage, a small percentage actually stayed on campus because they had nowhere to go. So It's been very, very, very difficult for the students that we serve.
Yeah. And so, you obviously is a top advocate for these students. When you think about colleges' decisions looking forward to the next couple of months in terms of distance learning or in-person learning and all of that, I mean, how do you balance the impact that will be, the impact on students in terms of their educational needs or their health needs?
Yeah, it's been, again, as I said, it's been difficult, mainly because we want our students to continue their education journey, right? So part of the challenge for our students, as you know, as far as the data, African Americans have disproportionately been impacted by COVID-19 more so than any other community, and more specifically death. And a lot of our students come from those communities. So therefore, life is here now. So students are making real life decisions as it relates to, do I go back to school or do I stay home and help my family out? Because in addition to the unfortunate situation that's happening with them as far as family members dying, you also have family members who've lost their jobs. So that is another barrier on top of that. And what we do know is that we want students to continue their educational journey, because once you stop and then you get in life, then you start dealing with life, it's hard. It's that much harder for you to get back in to start to finish. So we've been working with members of Congress to try to get funding, scholarships to support our students. We've been working with our corporate partners, and they have doubled down in their support to get scholarships so that these students can continue their education.
So student organizing is such a key component of these social movements and political campaigns, especially now, and not having students able to be physically together and organize on a campus. How do you think that's going to impact, the conversation that we're having right now, especially extending into the fall and into next year?
Well, social media, we have a way of keeping connected to each other through social media. And as you know, our namesake, Thurgood Marshall, his legacy stands for basically the three pillars: social justice, equality, and education. That's what Thurgood Marshall was all about. That was his life and journey. Our students who are on our campuses recognize the need for social equality in this country. And so that a lot of the social unrest created the disturbance that's happening right now with the unfortunate incident with George Floyd, created a lot of these challenges. So our students are communicating with each other. They are engaging. They've been part of some of the protests that's been out there, and they've been wearing their masks. Then they've been doing the things that you need to do in terms of standing up for what is right. And I still see that as continuing in terms of that process.
Right, regardless of whether, you're physically there or not. Relatedly, this is causing a massive disruption across the world, across higher education. But you referenced earlier, the unique challenges faced by HBCUs, which have a different financial situation. Could you tell us a bit more about, how are you managing that financial impact? How are you trying to set it up? So, obviously this is going to stretch on for the near future. Extended future, we don't know. So what are HBCUs trying to do in order to set themselves up to be able to, minimize that impact?
So what we're doing, we're working with our corporate partners, and what I can say, our partners have doubled down in their support of our students. Let me give you a stat. 73% of our students who attend HBCUs will qualify for a federal program called the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is an entitlement program, and those dollars will go to the most neediest students. And in order for a family of four to qualify, the maximum family income would be $50,000. Our students, the maximum income for their families is less than $20,000. So think about that. $20,000 and you're trying to go to college, and in some cases, college will double that amount. And then that financial stress associated with that, and you're the first one, not only you're the first one in your family to go to college. So that's another barrier that you have to deal with in terms of the challenges associated with that. So what we do here to minimize that, we raise funds with our partners, with foundations. And what we do know that the number one reason why students do not finish college is not because they cannot do it academically, it's because they can't afford it. So part of our challenge here and part of the support that we've been getting is setting up scholarships so that they can, not loans, but scholarships, so that when they graduate, they don't have a big debt that they have to pay back. They have loans so they can jump right into the workforce as relates to those scholarship programs. And what we've been seeing, we've seen an increase in the number of support from corporations, from major corporations like Amazon. Employees got together. We just celebrated. They did an employee fundraiser for us, raised over $1 million to support these students. We set up an emergency fund immediately to help these students. Microsoft jumped in. We've had a lot of corporate partners that have said, we want to help these young people because they play a critical role in our society.
Right, and related to that, I mean, obviously the scholarships and and the financial support, but also you've spoken about this in the past, the technological infrastructure that was kind of missing. I mean, that's true in many places, but especially for a lot of these students, in order to actually be able to do distance learning and not disrupt their education. How has that been in terms of just trying to make sure that they've got the resources they need?
Absolutely, that's been another challenge. And in some places, when students had to shift from face-to-face to online, they went back to their communities. In some communities in rural Alabama, I talked to the president, President Ross at Alabama State, and he shared with me that 15% of his students, 15% of his students had to go back into a community where they didn't have broadband access. They didn't have the Starbucks. You couldn't go to the Starbucks to get the Wi-Fi. So they didn't have access. So those students had to pivot. And they had to go back in terms of how they would communicate with their faculty through correspondence. Can you imagine correspondence where you write your information and you mail it in for your faculty member to review it in this day and age? And so that's real. And that's real not only in rural Alabama, also in rural Mississippi. So we've been working to try to make sure that funding coming from the federal government will provide the necessary resources to help these young people. And what this pandemic has done is actually put a magnifying glass on the challenges, just magnified it so that those challenges have been exposed even more so for our institutions.
Right, and as well for your partners, like you mentioned. I mean, conversely, we're talking about all these challenges, but they've also, been recently the recipients of an influx of high-profile donations. We have the philanthropist Mackenzie Scott, Netflix CEO Reed Hastings. Why do you think support for HBCUs has become such a focal point in this larger conversation about equality and social justice in America, and especially in 2020 in this particular environment with the pandemic and everything else going on?
Well, I think, again, they have become a focal point because America recognized the importance of these institutions and what they have done. The reality, if we didn't have HBCUs in this country, there would be no Black middle class, period, plain and simple. These institutions were created with sole purpose of providing educational opportunities for African Americans at the end of slavery. And that at that time, Black students could not attend white institutions. So therefore, these institutions were created with that sole purpose. And by creating these institutions, we now have Black doctors, we have Black lawyers, we have Black professionals, we have Black people in key positions across this country. And it was the HBCUs that played a critical role with that establishment. And the reality, the students that we serve usually are students who have challenges coming from educational communities where they've had some challenges in their educational upbringing, and by bringing them and giving them some additional support to help them. And so part of our goal here at TMCF is to continue to talk about the importance of these institutions and the critical role that they play in our society in providing opportunity for those that may not have those opportunities otherwise.
Right, and part of this debate, which, has really kind of taken off during the Democratic primaries as well, there was a Biden proposal for racial equity, which advocates making HBCUs tuition free. What would the impact of that kind of proposal be? I mean, obviously there's been a lot of similar things in that vein proposed, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that would be huge. I mean, for the first time when all of the Democratic candidates had an HBCU platform, and part of it was very deliberate. TMCF played a critical role in that, along with UNCF and NAFIO, the three major national advocacy groups, working with members to magnify the profile of our HBCUs. But if we can get free tuition for those students, not only those students who are attending HBCUs, but students who have financial challenges, it would be a game changer in this country. What we're asking for, we're asking to double the Pell, because Pell is a critical entitlement program to support those students to help them graduate. 30 years ago, the Pell covered maybe 60% of their education. Now, if it's 10%, that's good. So therefore, by increasing that federal program, will create a major game changer for this country, and to provide incredible opportunity for so many people.
Yeah. And then, you also just, back to something you said as well about, again, this kind of double situation happening this particular year that's putting HBCUs kind of, in the spotlight so much. I believe, Congresswoman Barbara Lee called it the pandemic within a pandemic. You have this massive, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is proportionally impacting these communities, and also, this massive conversation and these protests and all of that. I mean, this puts HBCU leaders and students, obviously, in this position of having to speak to all of this at once. And you've spoken in the past and other leaders of these colleges about the importance for actions and not statements. We were done with these statements. We've done this for a long time. I wanted to know, when you speak about actions and not statements, kind of what do you, what are you referring to, and what would you want to hope that you would see more of?
Well, when we say action, and one example that is very clear, the recent CARES Act, which played a critical role in supporting higher education in general. There was a major request from TMCF, UNCF, and NAFIO that HBCUs receive a set aside in those dollars, and that with that program, and we received close to $1 billion to support HBCUs and minority serving institutions in this country, and that has never happened before. So that's action. So those dollars immediately went to the schools, immediately went to the students, and now we're in this next stimulus bill. Both sides, the Republican in the Senate and the Democrats in the House, both, they have large, significant dollar requests that we've put forward that could play a major role with the infrastructure for these campuses. So that's the type of action we're talking about, because it will have an immediate impact on the people. What people don't understand is that just because our schools received a large one-time, I would say, stimulus, it just made them whole. It did not give them an advantage where all of a sudden they got all this cash. No, it just made them whole, because unlike some of our other sister institutions, they might have large endowments. We do not have large endowments on our campuses to draw off on during times that we have these challenges right now. So therefore, the additional support that we're receiving has been very, very grateful, and we've been very appreciative for members that have argued for us on our behalf and our students.
Right, and like, as you said, a sustained effort, not a one-time, this is in the news now kind of situation in order to yield these tangible results. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Williams. I really appreciate you joining us today on Time 100 Talks.
Thank you for inviting me.